Welcome to a deep dive today into something kind of surprising. We're going to be looking at how the reflections of one of those Roman emperors, the Stoic one, well, how those ideas, those really old ideas actually,
Mhm.
ended up influencing a major figure in the Scottish Enlightenment.
Yeah, it's one of those things you wouldn't necessarily put them together right, but that's
Hmm.
what makes it so interesting. We're digging into annotations, and not just any annotations. These are from the 18th century philosopher Francis Hutcheson, and he's grappling with Marcus Aurelius's Meditations.
Okay, so hold on. We're not just talking about meditations by itself, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about how someone like Hutcheson, with his own ideas about moral philosophy, how he made sense of those ancient Stoic ideas.
You got it. Imagine like you're looking over Hutcheson's shoulder as he's reading Marcus Aurelius, and we get to see his reactions, like how this stuff lands on someone centuries later. Totally different world.
Before we get to those reactions, though, just a really quick refresher for anyone who maybe hasn't thought about these guys in a while.
Of course. So, first up, Marcus Aurelius. Roman emperor, ruled from 161 to a 180 AD, known for keeping a cool head in some pretty wild times. But the thing is, he was also really into Stoicism, like a true believer.
Stoicism, that's all about using your brain, keeping those emotions on a leash, accepting whatever life throws at you.
That's the simplified version, yeah.
Mhm.
But the core is there. And in Meditations, we get this up-close look at Aurelius trying to live by those Stoic ideals. Not about being some robot without feelings, but about finding peace, being a good person, even when everything's chaotic.
And zoom ahead roughly 1,600 years, you've got Francis Hutcheson. It's the 1700s. Scotland's buzzing with ideas, the whole Scottish Enlightenment thing.
Such a vibrant time. They were really wrestling with the big stuff. What is morality? What makes us human? What's the point of reason? And Hutcheson, he was right there in the thick of it. He got particularly interested in this moral sense theory. It's this idea that we humans were kind of hardwired to know right from wrong.
So he's digging into how we decide what's moral, not just accepting whatever's been handed down. And that's where his meditations notes become super interesting. He's not just saying, oh, here's what Aurelius wrote in different words. He's having a conversation with the text. Yeah.
You could say that. It's wild. He's pulling out these ancient Stoic concepts, virtue, reason, and he's weaving them into his own theories about being a good person. Like he's having this dialogue across centuries with Marcus Aurelius.
It's kind of wild, right? One of the most, I don't know, striking things is how they both use this metaphor about people being puppets. Not your typical philosophy talk.
It's a powerful image, you're right. It gets at how they both saw human nature, the struggle to be good. Like in Meditations, there's this bit where Marcus Aurelius says we're basically puppets getting yanked around by our passions. He says it's our rational soul, our intellect, the thinking part of us that needs to be the one in charge, not these random impulses.
So it's not about, like, pretending you don't have emotions. It's about using your brain to decide what you do. Fits with Stoicism being about navigating a world that's always throwing curveballs.
And for Hutcheson, that whole puppet metaphor, it really resonated with his idea of this, well, he called it the noble part of us. Wasn't exactly a household term, so worth unpacking a bit. He thought that inside each of us, there's this part that wants to be good, to do the right thing.
Like that angel on your shoulder idea, fighting against the devil.
Yeah,
But this noble part, it's not coming from outside. It's part of what makes us human.
exactly. That's what Hutcheson saw as essential to us being able to reason and be good, and he saw hints of that in Marcus Aurelius. They both saw how we're kind of split between getting swept away by feelings and making choices.
Over 1,500 years apart. But they both saw that potential for good in us, right?
Right.
But also how much we're fighting against, let's say, the not-so-noble parts of ourselves.
Absolutely. And get this, Hutcheson thought Stoicism provided a really useful framework, surprisingly down to earth, for how reason can guide us to make ethical decisions. He thought that was key for a healthy society.
Okay, but weren't other Enlightenment thinkers also big on reason? What was it about the Stoic approach that clicked with Hutcheson?
Good point. See, Hutcheson found some of those other rationalist philosophers, the ones around then, a little too, I don't know, abstract, up in the clouds. They acted like reason and emotion were totally separate things. The Stoics, though, they appealed to him because they saw reason as grounded in what Aurelius called the heart.
So not about shutting down your feelings, but understanding how they work with your ability to think things through.
Precisely. And you can really see this in how Hutcheson interprets certain parts of Meditations. There's this one phrase, so powerful, where Aurelius talks about the rational soul, the heart. It's got this built-in ability to see what's morally right. And Hutcheson, he takes it a step further, calls it the law of God written in the heart.
Wow, the law of God written in the heart. That's something else. That's not just thinking about morality, that's tying it into something way deeper, something we just feel. It makes you wonder, though, how did Hutcheson, who was a devout Christian, how did he square those old Stoic ideas with his faith? Because on the surface, those two don't exactly scream compatible.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It gets right to the core of what Hutcheson was doing. And it's one we're going to dig into right after this.
Yeah, you're really hitting on something there. It's a tension Hutcheson definitely felt, you can tell. I mean, you've got Marcus Aurelius living in a time when Christians were often, let's say, not treated so well, persecuted
Right.
even. And Hutcheson, he's still finding so much value in this guy's writing.
It's a real head-scratcher when you put it like that. So how did he reconcile that? I mean, with his obvious admiration for Aurelius and for Stoicism more broadly. Well, Hutcheson, to his credit, he doesn't try to dodge the tough parts. He faces this contradiction head on in his notes. Like, he talks about this letter Aurelius wrote defending himself against these accusations about how Christians were being treated. He brings in that historical context, the whole picture.
He's not sugarcoating it then.
No way. He's laying it all out there. This is the reality, but let's try to make sense of it from different perspectives. For instance, there's a part where he suggests maybe those decrees Aurelius made about Christians, maybe they got twisted or enforced way too harshly by, local governors who are maybe a little power hungry. It's like he's trying to figure out how can someone who talks so much about being good, how could they be involved in something like that?
It's a question we still ask, right?
Yeah.
How do you judge people from the past who live by totally different rules, morally speaking? Do you hold their feet to the fire with today's standards or try to see it their way through the lens of their time?
Man, that's the challenge of studying history, isn't it? And the thing about Hutcheson, he doesn't pretend it's easy. He just lays it all out, all the complexities, and he's basically saying, all right, readers, you wrestle with this too. Shows real intellectual honesty.
He's not trying to give us some, airbrushed version of history or make Aurelius fit into a perfect little box.
Right. He's recognizing that the past is messy, complicated. Even people who tried to be good, they were still shaped by their times.
Okay, but even with all that historical context, how does Hutcheson connect the dots? How does he bring together Marcus Aurelius' Stoicism and his own very strong Christian beliefs?
That's where this divine spark idea really takes center stage. Over and over, Hutcheson points out how Aurelius keeps coming back to this something inside us, this connection to something bigger. And that really resonated with Hutcheson's own belief in God, this idea of humanity made in God's image.
So he's finding common ground, like a shared foundation, even though their specific religious beliefs were different.
And it's not just theoretical. He highlights how this belief actually plays out in how Aurelius lived. Like, Aurelius was big on returning good for evil. Hutcheson saw that as proof, evidence of that goodness in action. And that focus on forgiveness, on being kind, even to people who've wronged you, that really echoed what Christianity teaches.
It's like he's finding these universal truths about how to be a good person, and they're woven into both Stoicism and Christianity. Makes you think these ideas about kindness, about forgiving people, trying to be better, maybe those go beyond any one religion or belief system.
And that is a really powerful thought, isn't it? That maybe there are these fundamental truths about how we should live that speak to people across different cultures, different times even.
Makes you think about how much power ideas have, how they can close these gaps that seem huge, impossible to bridge.
For sure. And it reminds us to really look for those connections, those places where we agree with people who might seem totally different on the surface. To not just focus on disagreeing, but try to find those shared values we might miss otherwise.
So far, we've mostly talked about those parallels Hutcheson saw between Stoicism and Christianity. But he wasn't just comparing them, right? What did this whole deep dive into meditations, how did that actually change his own ideas about morality?
It's fair to say that grappling with Aurelius, especially through those annotations, it really had a big impact on Hutcheson's thinking. And then his work, in turn, became really influential during the Scottish Enlightenment. Got a lot of people talking about what morality is, the role of reason, why being good matters for a good society, all that.
Like a ripple effect, huh?
Exactly. It just goes to show, even reading something written centuries ago, really digging into it, that can spark new ideas, even change how we think about history.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it, right?
Yeah.
Here's this Roman emperor writing down his private thoughts, and then hundreds of years later, this Scottish philosopher is engaging with those thoughts, and it ends up shaping his whole philosophy, which then influences who knows how many people after that. It makes you realize how important ideas are. They can outlive anything, even entire civilizations.
It reminds us that these historical figures, emperors, philosophers, they weren't just names in books, They were real people trying to figure out the same big questions we still ask today.
Exactly. Like, what's the right thing to do? What are our responsibilities to each other? How do we be good people? How do we live a life that matters? Those are questions we're all still grappling with.
And I think that's the beauty of these deep dives, When we revisit these old conversations, it helps us figure out our own answers. Like, just as Hutcheson learned from Marcus Aurelius, we can learn from the wisdom of the past, even as we make our own way in the world today.
Speaking of those people from the past, those real people, I heard there are some pretty interesting stories, anecdotes, I guess you call them, that Hutcheson throws into his annotations, things that show a more personal side of Marcus Aurelius.
Oh, absolutely. Little glimpses into how he tried to put those Stoic principles into practice, not just the theory, but the messy reality of being a ruler, a father, a human being. Want to hear about one?
Yeah, hit me with an anecdote. I always love a good history story. Lay it on me. What kind of stories did Hutcheson find so interesting?
So there's this one, it's about how Marcus Aurelius dealt with, like the ultimate betrayal. His own son-in-law, Avidius Cassius, this guy starts a rebellion against him.
Whoa, talk about family drama. That's intense.
Yeah.
So how did Marcus Aurelius handle that?
That's the thing, right? Instead of going all, vengeful Roman emperor demanding everyone's head on a platter, he reacts with, I don't know how to even put it, incredible restraint. When Cassius ends up getting killed by his own soldiers, Aurelius, he actually goes to the Senate and begs them to spare the families and supporters of everyone involved.
Whoa, that's not your typical response to an attempted coup, even today, let alone back then.
Well,
What was he thinking? Like, where's the logic in that kind of mercy?
and that's exactly what Hutcheson is trying to unpack in his annotations. He points to this whole thing, this event, as like the ultimate example of Aurelius walking the walk. Not just talking about Stoicism, but actually living it out, even when it would have been so easy to, go the other way. Remember how important it was in Stoicism to recognize that we're all human, to forgive, to not let those destructive emotions, the anger, the thirst for revenge, to not let those control you?
So for Hutcheson, this wasn't just some juicy historical gossip. This was proof that Aurelius's philosophy wasn't just talk. It actually shaped how he acted, even in the toughest situations.
Exactly. I think that's why the story sticks with you, It shows that Stoicism wasn't just some high-minded theory. It was something you could, I don't know, something that could actually make you a better person.
Makes you wonder, if we had old Hutcheson here looking at our lives, writing annotations, what would he say? Like, what divine sparks would he see in us? Or maybe what puppet strings are yanking us around?
That's a really interesting thought, isn't it? And it gets at why it's so important to look at this stuff, to dig into these old ideas. It's not just about history. It's about us, too. Our own struggles to do the right thing, especially when it's hard.
It's easy to forget sometimes that even these figures from history, the emperors, the philosophers, they were dealing with a lot of the same stuff we are. Like, how do you know what's right? What are you supposed to do with your life? How do you actually be a good person? Those questions never really go away, do they?
And I really do think that by having these conversations, by looking at how they wrestled with these questions, it helps us find our own answers. Just like Hutcheson learned from Marcus Aurelius, we can learn from the past too, even as we're busy figuring out our own lives. So I think that's a good place to wrap up for today. We've covered a lot of ground, but, the thinking doesn't have to stop here.
For sure. If you're anything like me, your brain's probably buzzing with all sorts of new thoughts after a deep dive like this. Definitely makes you want to keep exploring.